Good evening, everyone. It is Thursday, March 28th, 2024, 5:30 p.m., and welcome to the Salem Area Mass Transit District Board of Directors meeting. We will now call this meeting to order. I always forget to hit the gavel. Would the clerk of the board please note attendance of the board? Thank you. Director Bill Holmstrom is not able to attend this evening, and we do have Director Davidson online and will be joining us shortly. General Manager Pollock, can you please lead us in the safety moment?
Great, thank you. Well, it is spring, and it may not look like it or feel like it outside. It will be spring weather this weekend, and that creates a great opportunity to review your home safety checklist. So we'll start with smoke alarms. You should always test your smoke alarms every month and replace the batteries at least once a year. Smoke alarms should be in every bedroom and in the common areas of each home. Carbon monoxide detectors should be installed in a central location outside each bedroom and on every level of the home, just like smoke alarms. The National Safety Council recommends every family have an emergency plan in place in the event of a natural disaster or other catastrophic event. And spring's a great time to review that plan with family members. Most of us live with dangerous poisons lurking in kitchen cabinets, bathrooms, basements, or garages. You should discard old or outdated products. First aid advice on containers may be incorrect and outdated. Even in small amounts, windshield wiper fluid is poisonous. If swallowed, it can cause blindness or death to people and pets. Pesticides can be taken in through the skin or inhaled. Even leather shoes and gloves do not offer full protection. Pesticides can be extremely poisonous. You should stay away from areas that have been sprayed until the spray has dried for at least an hour. And wear protective clothing when using bug spray or other spray products. Put on long sleeve shirts, long pants, socks, shoes, and gloves, and remove and wash clothing after using chemicals. If you adhere to the intent of the checklist, you will have a fun and enjoyable spring and summer. And that concludes my safety message.
Thank you, General Manager. Okay, that brings us to item 2, announcements and changes to the agenda. I don't believe we have any. And that brings us right to item 3. So presentations, our state legislative session report. General Manager Pollock.
Great, thank you. I'd ask Dale Pettit and Waylon Buchan from CFM to please come forward and present the report.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the invitation for our presentation. Again, I am Dale Penn. I'm the State Affairs Partner at CFM. I've got Waylon Buchan here with me, and together we represent the CFM team that represents Cherriots in the Capitol. So we put together a presentation that goes over our most recent legislative session, which ended this last month. Actually, this month, I should say. Feels like more than a month ago. So this is kind of our agenda today. We have just a quick brief on our CFM State Affairs team, go over our legislative session, timeline dates, some of the major issues, and we'll do our best to try to answer any of the questions you may have about those. Talk a little bit about transit issues and transportation issues that came up. Go over our Mass Transit District legislative priorities, Salem Area Mass Transit District legislative priorities. This is the document that we put together with your legislative committee and board's approval prior to session, and then how those issues fared during the session. And then we'll talk a little bit about the interim and heading into the 2025 session. So this is our state affairs team. Myself and Waylon do all the work for Cherriots. And then Zach, Ryan, and Jessica are also members of our team who help out as needed on issues that come up. So the 2024 legislative session, constitutionally limited to 35 days. It is what we call a short session. The legislature met biannually up until about 2010 when they made the decision to also hold short sessions, ostensibly to focus on budget issues and minor policy issues that may come up in the middle of a 2-year budget. And that's not really what has happened. I don't think anyone who works in the building will stipulate that that reality has shifted quite a bit. And what ends up happening in the short session, as we all know, is a lot of work, a lot of budget, and a lot of policy work. In this biennium, we have had several quarters, dozen or more, of continued growth, even throughout the pandemic and beyond. And so what that means is that we also balance our budget in a little bit different way. If we had a downturn economy, we would be facing cuts and we'd have to protect services and we'd go in with a different attitude and a different lobby strategy. But because there's just continued economic growth, what you have is just almost a feeding frenzy of groups, advocacy groups, different industries coming forward and saying, now is the time we need to invest. And so that's why we included the information on the economic forecast as well. Traditionally, we have a 2-year budget, and we wait for the last budget in a long session to set the cornerstones of a 2-year budget. The economic forecast that we see in the middle of a short session provides legislators with updated information as to how much money the state has to invest or not invest in services. And so we received our economic forecast on the 7th, and that allowed the Ways and Means co-chairs to dictate exactly what they wanted to pass out of Ways and Means, what they wanted to invest in, what they could invest in around the major priorities of session. We'll get to those in a moment. The other thing I'll mention is that sine die, or the 35th day of session, was supposed to be March 10th, but I think the specter of a weekend being able to be spent at home forced legislators to sine die a couple days early. They did that on Thursday night, March 7th, and then were able to go home to their districts over that weekend. If they hadn't arrived at compromise in collaboration on major policy bills and initiatives, they would have been there through the 10th. When I started out as a lobbyist, or worked in the building actually, we would often go to 1, 2, or 3 in the morning to finish out session, just to get things finished before sine die happens in an odd numbered year or so. So the major issues this session, as you can see there: housing and homelessness, Measure 110 changes, and then campaign finance reform are just some of them. The biggest 2 issues, of course, are going to be housing and homelessness, or houselessness, and Measure 110 changes. I want to focus on Measure 110 just for a couple minutes here. So Measure 110, under kind of the threat of a potential ballot measure to pull back provisions of ballot measure 110 from the 2020 election, really forced legislative leadership to bring together a large group of stakeholders and lawmakers into the Joint Addiction and Community Safety Response Committee. And that was formed in the fall of last year to develop legislative priorities and changes to ballot measure 110 that would pass through session. If that didn't happen, there was the fear that a significant ballot measure would be on the ballot this November that would strip back many of the changes that ballot measure 110 put into place. So legislators ultimately landed on a policy and a budget package, House Bill 4002 on the policy side, and Senate Bill 5204 on the, or House Bill 5204 on the budget side. 4002 was really focused on criminalizing possession of a controlled substance as an unclassified misdemeanor. And that made deflection options in each county possible as well. It truly tried to encourage law enforcement to seek deflection and diversion as opposed to arrest. It made some additional changes. This is the result of dozens of amendments and dozens of conversations back and forth, heavily controversial, and with strong feelings on both sides of the issue. This is one we monitored for Cherriots. We didn't have necessarily a dog in this fight, but we wanted to monitor it because of how it impacts your riders, how it impacts the community, and the individuals who rely on your service. So accompanying that bill was 5204, which is the budget side of it. So in addition to policy changes that would increase penalties, legislators also wanted to make sure they invested in support services for individuals who may fall under those new policy provisions. So it included over $200 million in allocations to public safety, mental health, and prevention. And these are really focused on shovel-ready projects worth about $85 million in the behavioral health system, about $80 million in public safety, including deflection programs and public defense, about $9 million towards workforce training, behavioral health, and some other pockets of money for other investments. So that's how Measure 110 ended up, and this is one we will continue to monitor, and the entire legislative body as well as stakeholders are going to continue to monitor how this is implemented out in the community. So I'm going to stop there, see if there are any questions, just understanding that this is one that we monitored from afar for Cherriots, and we did not step into this process. So. All right, we'll go on to housing and houselessness. So again, this was a huge priority. It was the only priority of Governor Kotek going into this legislative session. And ultimately, it ended up being both a policy and a budget bill. In the month leading up to session, Governor Kotek indicated to stakeholders in the community that traditionally she would have several legislative concepts through session, but she wanted to focus primarily on this. And she asked originally for about $500 million of investments into housing. Ultimately, after negotiations back and forth and looking at the economic forecast, legislators arrived at about $350 million. Senate Bill 1537 was the policy arm of it, allowing some changes into the UGB incorporation process and some other grants. It created a new office called the Housing Accountability and Production Office, or HAPO, and then multiple funds, probably 3 different funds that are focused on investing in housing and houselessness. In addition, we had Senate Bill 1530, which is the funding portion of that bill, and that contained about $90 million dedicated to infrastructure projects, $106 million for shelter and temporary housing, really focused on shovel-ready projects. So these are, I believe, some projects in the Salem community were also funded through this, or at least some of the end of session budget bills received money as it relates to housing and housing infrastructure. So stop there and see if there are any questions or comments on the housing and houselessness bill. Yeah.
Director Carney?
Thank you, President Hinojosa-Pressy. Of the infrastructure is kind of a big and squishy word. I'm wondering if you could kind of help us understand what the $90 million of investment for infrastructure might look like. Is this water lines or sidewalks or, okay.
Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, it's a great question, Director. It's mostly the stuff that would otherwise be an impediment to new housing. So you wouldn't want to build a development to nowhere where there's no bridge, roadways or water, wastewater, broadband, all the other services that make you able to actually live in that affordable housing. And the list primarily is comprised of water and wastewater investments that would allow that to go forward. Those are where a lot of cities, in particular cities, are hamstrung in their ability to go out and build that new wastewater treatment plant. And that's stopping their development in many cases.
And that bill, about $90 million for water, I forgot to mention, the total was about $300 million, $280 to $300 million. 90 of it went to water. There was about $112 million to housing and community services for shelter operations, homelessness prevention, $30 million to DAS for distribution to entities that will acquire and redevelop property for affordable housing, and then several other pots of money. But those are some of the biggest ones. And then the final thing I'll mention just very briefly is campaign finance. So Oregon lawmakers passed House Bill 4024 in the final days of session as a bit of a surprise to many. Really, not many individuals believed that this could happen in session. But ultimately, Oregon is currently one of only probably a dozen states that have no limit on campaign contributions. And so this bill, starting in 2027, individuals and corporations can only give a certain amount, up to about $3,300 to statewide campaigns per election cycle. Political party committees can give up to 30, and there's a lot of nuance in this and little carve-outs and caveats. So so-called membership organizations such as labor unions and nonprofit advocacy groups can contribute up to $26,400 for statewide candidate. So there's a lot of nuance, a lot of components of this bill that we could spend a lot of time in the weeds. But the big takeaway is that this shows, again, that this session, when compared to previous sessions, where there was a lot of bipartisan rancor, there were several big bipartisan compromises and collaborations this session that were surprising and were very welcome. So it's a very different environment from previous sessions. So I'll stop there for the big kind of major issues. A lot of other stuff passed this session that I didn't want to spend a lot of time on unless there were questions, but right to repair was an issue that came up, as well as quite a bit of other concepts on firefighter and district attorney and police officer pensions, all sorts of other things. So.
No, I don't see any
All
questions.
right, so we'll move on to the next one. I'll turn it to Waylon.
So as Dale mentioned, we were surprised this year with the amount of bipartisan cooperation we had. Over the last several cycles, we've all been dealing with walkouts or threats of walkouts. And if it wasn't the walkouts, it was also delay tactics, enforcing every bill to be read aloud, or threatening lawsuits, or demanding certain bills be expedited to the Supreme Court. We didn't have any of that. We did have the repercussions of one of those lawsuits. We actually did see some action on measure, I believe it was 113, that held accountable 10 Republican senators that engaged in a walkout and passed their threshold of 10 unexcused absences. That was litigated in sort of real time during the session. We saw both federal and state court challenges taking place. And as you know the result, those 10 are now eligible for re-election. They're not all on the same timetable, but we will be seeing those seats turn over. And despite that, we still had quite a bit of cooperation, as Dale just mentioned. We also talked quite a bit about transportation, partly just because the way the transportation package cadence works, about every decade or so we engage in that work. And 24 sort of served as a prologue to 25, and they really started in earnest having some pretty heavy conversations about what's before them. On the transportation side, it's not easy. They have some real challenges. The highway cost responsibility piece that lives in our Constitution is currently out of balance, with heavy-duty commercial vehicles overpaying by something to the tune of about $500,000 a day as an industry. So their overpayment is causing them to bring suit to the state. They're going to sue on that. We also have a budget crisis at ODOT, mostly due to diminishing gas tax revenues as people flip over to fuel-efficient and EV vehicles. But that's something they're going to have to reconcile. They spent a lot of time talking about tolling because the agency was in the middle of implementing tolling. And to the point where we had assistant directors giving like multiple times a week presentations on where they're going to put the gantries. And then right as the session concluded, the governor announced that she'd be putting that plan on hold indefinitely, and they would not be pursuing the regional mobility pricing program. That's not to say that tolling is forever dead, and it probably will take place in some form, whether that's a road user charge or some limited form of tolling in the future. But clearly, the governor's office was not happy with the current plan as it was being contemplated, and so they are being sent back to the drawing board. Again, that'll make for more work in 25 as we try to wrestle with a lot of different tricky issues, and we expect, really, a lot of us that are plugged into this expect this to breathe some new life into things like road user charging, or VMT, because it may be a logical pivot point to address both the budget problems and that gas tax issue that we talked about. So more to come on that, but we've watched, and they rolled out a plan. They have a tentative plan that they're going to address these issues. They've rolled out a bit of a strategy. We call it a draft outline, if we're being generous. And they are going to tour the state and do multiple pit stops throughout different regions of Oregon. And that's their hope, is that it would build support for the package from the public and inform their decision-making based on what the public says they need. We also saw some interesting issues, right to repair. That's been a kind of a perennial issue. It comes year after year. This year it made it across the finish line, and now Oregon has one of the strongest right to repair laws in the entire nation. And that means basically that manufacturers of things like smartphones and video game consoles were exempted from the bill, if you care. They are required to provide manuals, tools, and the ability for you or a shop to repair your device. And some of those provisions in that bill make Oregon a leader in that policy. And then last but not least, we also saw daylight savings time come up with some serious discussion. It actually made it out of the Senate. It was on a track to possibly make it through the session. It was killed somewhat unceremoniously at the end of session and, forgive the pun, ran out of time. And so now well, they may be revisiting that next session as well, so we'll see.
All right. Any questions on that?
Absolutely.
Director Duncan?
Thank you very much. I do have a quick question. It keeps getting thrown around in meetings, and I'd love to know if it got brought up at all in session, is there's been a lot of talk of imposing a weight tax on just electric vehicles to try to make up for the gas tax. My rebuttal is always, well, how about all vehicles? We've got those big personal vehicle trucks that are driving around. And I wanted to know if that had come up in session at all, because it's a thing I'm personally keeping an eye on.
Great question, Director. It comes up all the time. We actually have kind of a weird system in place now from House Bill 2017, where we have tiered MPG registration surcharges. So if you're at like 0 to 29 MPG and then another category, and then there's an EV category, you actually pay a surcharge. And it's an attempt to get exactly at the issue you're discussing, where there's that diminishing returns on the gas tax, or some people just don't participate in it anymore because they have an EV. We think that the road user charge piece is what they assume will solve all of those questions at once, because you could kind of bake into the different rates and get that to be equitable across the different weight classes. They also might just keep it simple and load all that onto registration fees. So they have a couple different levers they can pull, and that's what Dale and I are sort of witnessing as we're in there. They have hard decisions to make, and they have lots of different stakeholders pushing on them from every angle, and these are exactly the type of questions, one of probably 50, that they're trying to untangle right now. It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. The next transportation package is really going to be focused on maintenance and operations, probably not a lot of big projects, but all of it is going to be predicated on a conversation around revenue, whether that's a RUC, a road user charge, whether it's a variation of the gas tax or more gas tax, whatever it looks like. It could be they're looking at every potential revenue source to fund transportation next session. They're open to pretty much anything. So over the next few months, you can expect the Joint Committee on Transportation to hold public hearings around the state. And very similar to what they did prior to the last transportation package, they're going to go out to the community and ask, what's important to you? Here are some broad ideas that we're thinking about. What do you think about those ideas? And that will shape their priorities and their investments going forward. And so literally everything is on the table right now and being discussed, which is interesting. So,
Director Carney?
Thank you, President Hinojosa-Pressy. I have to assume, Oregon may be a little bit ahead in adoption of EV, but not more so than other states I can think of. And so it would seem to me a fuel tax is a common funding mechanism, and I'm seeing some nodding heads. So are other states facing this and sort of trying to seek a solution? And if so, what kind of shape are those taking?
They are all facing this same problem, but their problem is less ripe than ours, because a lot of them can rely on the third leg of their revenue stool in the form of sales taxes or whatever, or tolling, or some other third thing. Whereas here we have heavyweight mile taxes, we have light duty registration fees and gas taxes. We really can't even raise the weight mile taxes right now because they're already an overpayment. We don't have that third thing, that payroll tax. And so I think what we're seeing is Oregon is facing this problem probably ahead of the pack. I don't know off the top of my head. I don't think we have that many more EVs than your average state. But that's the revenue kind of corner we've painted ourselves into. And so I do think other states will wrestle with this in a serious way over the next decade or decades. It's a great question, too.
Oh, Director Davidson.
Thank you for the presentation. I listened to it intently on the way in. With the weight mile discrepancy, are legislators not acknowledging that it exists? Like, do they, from a posture standpoint, are they saying, no, this isn't real? Or does everybody believe it's real and they're just choosing not to act?
They all acknowledge it, and they know it's real, and they've had multiple presentations this session as well as during legislative days, previous iterations of those, to brief them. There have been some that have been, more hair on fire than others about this and trying to raise this issue to folks. We saw 3 pieces of legislation introduced this year. 2 of them would have reduced the weight mile tax brackets it just kind of just taken those existing as written tax brackets and just sort of reduced them. And that would have been one way to try to bring it back in balance. A third bill would have repealed the weight mile tax in its entirety and replaced it with a diesel tax like a lot of states use. All three of those bills, I think they maybe got public hearings and no further action. So that can tell you that there wasn't really an appetite, to be fair, in a 35-day short session to untangle a very arcane and tricky weight mile tax system in 35 days would be a pretty big lift. So that it makes sense that those bills didn't move forward.
Is your sense that they're hoping that a road use charge or some other solution will magically fix, like they won't actually have to address that problem because there's a different solution in hand?
Potentially. All
Okay.
those roads are sort of colliding in
Yeah.
maybe a serendipitous way, maybe a catastrophic way. We'll see how they handle it in 2025. Not to be
Right.
too cute about it, but it's hard, and
Sure.
they're trying to figure all that out. But you raise a good point. Today, we definitely have a weight distance taxation system for heavy trucks. We already charge them per mile, so you could say they're kind of on a road user charge.
Yeah.
It just needs to be modernized. It's a paper system designed in the 1940s. And if they can go from 120 tax brackets for weight classes to 12 and come under a road user charge, they would be very happy. So they're in those discussions now, but I would be speaking out of turn if I say anything else about their tax policy. They're all negotiating that as we speak, so.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? No? Okay.
Okay, great. We'll only spend a minute on this slide before we get into the specific bills. But I wanted everyone to have just a reminder on our 2024 state legislative agenda, which we adopted, or the board adopted in January ahead of the legislative session. The main components I want to talk about here is the preserve, maintain, and enhance public transportation investments. That is our number one priority. It's been our number one priority since the 2017 package passed, and that is maintaining and defending the STIF and the money that flows through that allows Cherriots to initially, kickstart weekend evening service and others. There's always the chance that this is on the cutting block, that someone will figure out that it's a good idea to sweep some of those funds for some. So successfully, that issue was not brought up, nor did we have to defend against anything substantial this session. There are always conversations, and we try to stay ahead of those. Whenever ideas start popping up, we have a detailed conversation with anyone who thinks that the STIF should be a slush fund for some other project. But it's always on the front of our mind. So that, no changes there. The next two, the transit safety and the west side regional rail expansion, I'll hold off on, and we can talk about in a moment if you want to talk about the zero emissions.
Yeah, not as much on the zero emission vehicles front as it pertains to transit and transit vehicles, but we did recapitalize the charge ahead rebate vehicle program for light vehicles, and so I think they'll be able to take advantage of the $7,500 federal cash on the hood incentive at the same time as a state incentive of, I think, equal dollar value until that money runs out again. So good news there.
And then the other issues up there, I-5 bridge replacement conversations, we're staying abreast of those. Tolling, as Waylon already mentioned, a big conversation that's starting to happen towards the end of session, and then due to the announcement, it's going to be something we're going to monitor going forward. So before we move on, any questions about anything else on the state legislative agenda? So bills of interest, we wanted to spend a couple minutes talking about several of these. So there's some pain points here. Senate Bill 1572, the West Side Express Service Expansion Study. This is one that was supported by the Cherriots board. We aggressively lobbied this. We submitted testimony. Board President Host Presley was there to testify in support of this bill. Thank you very much, along with mayors and other stakeholders, legislators from the area. It was a broad bipartisan effort, and it moved out of committee successfully with broad bipartisan support. It ended up in Ways and Means, and the unfortunate reality is it was not funded at the end of session. I think we and everyone else was surprised by that. It was a relatively small dollar figure, but what we're hoping to do going forward is to carry on the components of what 1572 would have put in place over the next year, and potentially start having conversations with all of those stakeholders, irrespective of the bill not moving forward. I think we can still have some of those conversations and plan out what a west extension into Salem and beyond would look like, potentially what it would cost, and then have that serve as a framework for when we go back to the session and we have a robust conversation on the transportation package. Well, let's see if we can have the west extension as a component of that. Any questions on that one? I know this was one that was near and dear to many people's hearts, so. Okay. I'll move on to 1553. So this is public transit worker safety. This was on our 2024 legislative priority list. Along with Measure 110, the delicate issue of how we deal with public drug use was debated in Senate Bill 1553. Cherriots monitored this legislation, but we did not testify. We didn't provide logos. We didn't lobby this issue. We monitored it. Our colleagues from TriMet and the Oregon Transit Association led efforts and worked directly with legislative leadership to address this complicated issue of drug use on transit vehicles and facilities. The forefront on their mind was the direct impact on riders and families and drivers, many of whom have little recourse to escape potential fentanyl or other drug use on an enclosed transit vehicle or facility. What we heard from our colleagues was that customer service feedback overwhelmingly listed this as a major issue for impacting transit use statewide. Does it keep people from using transit in other parts of the state? Potentially, and I think legislative leadership is very interested in trying to address that. So the bill sought to increase the penalties for using drugs in and around transit vehicles. While lawmakers were tackling this issue generally as it relates to Measure 110 in House Bill 4002, which we talked about, they also believed that transit was experiencing very unique challenges with drug use and wanted to try to find a fix for that. It would apply the crime of interfering with public transportation, the IPT, a Class A misdemeanor, to the use of illicit drugs on public transit vehicles only. The bill would also classify drug use on transit as a drug-designated misdemeanor. And what that allows is that individuals convicted of that crime would have access to state-funded treatment in many instances. So they're trying to address many of the concerns raised by stakeholders around changes to Measure 110 via these tweaks. The bill passed. It was heavily debated and heavily contested towards the last 2 weeks of session. It passed out. I think we're waiting to see if it will be signed by the governor. We have a couple more weeks, I think, before the deadline for that. And speaking of that broadly, there is, I think, another week and a half or something before the governor has to indicate bills passed in session, whether she will veto the bill entirely, line item veto, budget allocations, or whatnot. So we're still monitoring that, and I wish we had a full update. She is signing bills regularly right now, so we get notices that certain bills have been signed, but not all of them. She's only had a couple handfuls of bills signed, so that's still something we're going to monitor. And speaking of monitoring, this is an issue that I think we will monitor very closely as it's implemented and be ready, the board can be ready to provide feedback, guidance, comments on how that's implemented statewide going forward. It's a very delicate and complicated issue, and we, as your representatives in the building, took that to heart, took the conversation we had in January to heart about that, and we're very careful about this issue and monitored it. Yes, please.
Director Duncan.
Thank you. I asked one of my senators about this, but I'd love to get clarification now that's actually been passed. Does this bill have to do with actively doing drugs on transportation, possessing drugs on transportation, or being intoxicated on transportation? Because I feel like those are really important for enforcement mechanisms.
So our understanding is it's the first category. It'd be actively using drugs on public transportation.
Okay.
Whereas 4002 that you alluded to earlier is possession, and that's statewide. So the way it could play out is somebody would be subject to this using fentanyl on a transit bus. They wouldn't be subject to that on a station, but they still would be subject to possession under 4002 at that same station. So it's sort of like it's a package of laws, really, as you look at it this way.
It's definitely complicated.
It complicated things as we were discussing this in Salem as well, because there was it was unclear whether 1553 was going to be rolled into the larger package split off, and then they started to get a little different as they moved through the process as well.
I
But-
appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Rulemaking, is that going to be coming up for this bill, or?
Yes, but I don't know how it'll impact the criminal justice side of it or enforcement. I think a lot of the rulemaking that we don't understand has to do with the treatment options and all of that funding that's going to go out the gate. But we could look into that and provide a little follow-up if it's helpful.
Yeah, 4002, which is the broader Measure 110 changes, had 90-plus sections, and all of them heavily complicated. And you're right. I mean, a lot of individuals are going to be very interested in how the rulemaking and the implementation of this bill happens, because I think there's still a lot of questions, and this issue is so complicated and still very controversial. So it's one we're going to be monitoring very closely going forward, and we're happy to report back on anything impacting transit.
Thank you very much.
Director Carney?
Thank you, President Hinojosa Pressy. You just mentioned fentanyl. Is that the only, okay, so it's a broader category of,
Yeah,
Glad you asked that.
they used
I
it-
had noticed that too.
I was just trying to use an example, and partly because that was one that populated the public record quite a bit. That was definitely one of the focuses of the legislation. But the lawmakers colloquially were talking about hard drugs, recriminalizing hard drugs from Measure 110. So those are the category that they were sort of classifying. Marijuana obviously wouldn't be included in that. That's legal under state law, and they're using the marijuana funds to support all of these services that they're rolling out going forward. But it's more than just fentanyl, so sorry if that was confusing.
Anybody want to play Alanis Morissette?
and is it, I don't know, and maybe there's no one here that does. Would I be able to tell if the person like in the seat ahead of me was using fentanyl? Would the operator be able to tell? How, I don't know how you use it. Get it in
I
there
can't answer that
somehow.
question. I don't know.
Apparently, yes. A lot of times the individual would be actively smoking blue fentanyl
Okay,
pills
well,
on
that
a
one
piece of
seems pretty
foil, and
obvious,
it causes a very noxious, annoying vapor to everyone around, and the fumes are very offensive. And so I think that would be noticeable as opposed to someone taking some prescription pills before they got on the bus. At that point, they wouldn't even be in the category to be under 1553 either.
Okay.
And one of the reasons fentanyl is used pretty heavily is because of the byproduct after use and potential leaving it on the bus. There was a story that was repeated multiple times around a child who had access to, like in a supermarket parking lot or something, a small piece of foil with a residue on it that ended up going to the hospital.
They ate the foil.
And so I think that was one of the concerns on transit buses, is the leftover use of fentanyl in particular may have impacts to individuals on the bus. So,
And forgive us, we're not district attorneys, so this is
Yeah.
definitely out of our normal bailiwick. Right, no, we're doing our best here.
State, you can go ahead and do the next one, so.
Oh, sure. I can breeze through these ones. 4072 was sort of interesting. It dealt with state payments to the city of Salem for emergency and fire services that they render. You can imagine the city of Salem with its sort of unique high amount of state buildings and state property that's littered all through it. If the Department of Transportation, state building calls the fire department, city of Salem goes ahead and shows up, but they are not compensated necessarily for those services. So this is an effort to set aside money, I believe it was $10 million, to try to remedy that issue. Not successful, if I'm remembering correctly. Similarly, the task force on electric micromobility was also unsuccessful, but it was an important attempt to look at this issue and study it, given the proliferation of all these e-bikes and scooters and these kind of alternative modes. Oftentimes, as it connects to us, it's that last mile. So folks are bringing these on to transit vehicles, and cities, municipalities, counties, everybody's wrestling with how do we regulate these? Are there age restrictions? Are there safety equipment restrictions? Where and how fast can you use them? And so there's just this emerging whole area of devices. And it's not just, the e-scooters, it's all kinds of mobility devices. And I think they're really trying to wrap their head around that and what's the best statewide regulatory framework for that. So I think they'll be revisiting that. I wouldn't be surprised if it came up in 25 as part of a larger transportation package discussion too.
Any other questions? Those? All right. Well, that is our presentation. We're here to answer any other final questions you guys have.
Director Davidson?
No questions. I just really wanted to express my gratitude to you all for all the work that you have done, in particular with 1572. I really appreciated the above and beyond effort that you all went with that. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and we really appreciate the opportunity to represent Cherriots in the building, so thank you very much.
Any other questions, comments? No? Okay, yeah, I mean, I think, 1572 might have passed if we had decided to put an in and out, like satellite right there.
Yeah, I think you're right. We'll bring that up in the interim. I think that's the strategy for 25, so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, and I do want to make it clear that that didn't just come from me. We did have lawmakers asking the question if there was going to be an in and out. Yeah. Okay, so that brings us to item 4, public comment. Do we have any members of the public or anyone online or via the phone? Okay. That moves us into item 5, the consent calendar. Does anybody wish to pull anything from the consent calendar? No? If not, then I will entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar as presented.
I'd like to move that we approve the consent calendar as presented.
Thank you, Director Navarro. Any second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Director Carney. Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, vote is unanimous, and we move on to item 7, action items. General Manager Pollock.
Yeah, I'll ask Chris French and Krista Purser, correct? Please come forward and present the report on the coordinated plan and 5310 PMP plan updates.
Good evening, President and host Cressy. Thank you for having us. We're here this evening to present the recommendation from the STIF Advisory Committee to adopt the Coordinated Public Transit Human Services Transportation Plan for Marion and Polk counties and the Section 5310 Program Management Plan updates as presented in Attachment A and B. And we have a presentation this evening, and Krista will be presenting on the coordinated plan update. She's with Kittleson and Associates and worked with us on this project to update the coordinated plan.
All right. Thank you, Chris, and thank you for having me here tonight. For the sake of time, I'll shorten the name to Coordinated Plan Update. It's quite the long title. Just a quick overview. We'll tell you a little bit about what the plan is about, and then focus in on what public outreach we did throughout this process, the needs and strategies we found from that, and the priorities resulting from that, and then request adoption. Talk about next steps and how this will be used. I wanted to give a quick shout out to, I believe Ted's in Montana, but working alongside Chris and the team here to get this done. Also had Cogito, a public engagement specialist, on board to really push forward and get a lot of feedback from the community. So what are these plans? These are really dedicated to looking for needs for people with disabilities and seniors. The last time this plan was updated was in 2019, and as you can imagine, a lot of things have changed. Historically, this plan guided the STF dollars, really focusing on those key groups, but with that being incorporated into STIF, a lot of this was just updating that funding mechanism discussion and reflecting a few other communities while still focusing down to the people with disabilities and seniors. Also wanted to update our demographics, where our transit markets were, the way people have been using transit, and other demand response services has changed substantially. Wanted to coordinate and figure out what other providers were still doing, what they needed that we could potentially work together on. Get back out to the community. A lot of that, we wanted to hear about their needs and their goals. A lot of it just ends up being education. They're not familiar with a lot of the services that are available to them. And had some really great and exciting conversations about what opportunities they had. From there, just updating goals, objectives, and strategies. We have a lot of things that are still relevant from prior planning, but wanting to get those up to date with what we're hearing. These are relatively short. Sorry for the tiny text. Essentially, we've been working on this for the past 7 months. A lot of that upfront work, just getting the nitty-gritty details updated, and really that big task for occurring over September, really into November and December, was the outreach. So we had a lot of different events I'll talk about here in a moment, surveys and things. We have ran this plan through the STIF Advisory Committee. They've given their approval for it, and we're ready for you all to see this. So the engagement we did, first thing we wanted to do was make sure we had a good understanding of who all of the different providers are, both public and private. Heard about what their riders were experiencing, what their needs were operationally, what different challenges they had in terms of vehicle inventories, and different costs and costs of doing business. So heard a lot from them on their services, kind of had a full list we could share with people when we started going back out to the public. Ran a survey online throughout this whole period, getting feedback from them on what their top priorities were, what their challenges were in using services. And then had a number of different in-person events and workshops. So we've got a few of them listed there. Actually ended up holding 2 online events and hearing from a lot of different groups. We have needs identified within the plan. Those are organized into 6 groups of things. These aren't in any particular priority order. Really what this plan needs to do is be your wish list of any and everything that you could want to do, and then we have some priorities we'll talk about here in a moment that kind of set how you make those decisions moving forward. So this plan doesn't decide which things need to happen in what order, but provides that toolkit and that framework over the next few years. So we took the prior needs, revised those based on what we're hearing from those interviews, from the outreach, and from that different analysis that was going on. And those are in those 6 categories of transportation service needs. So what is the community actually receiving? The infrastructure, both on back-end maintenance and customer-facing. Coordination and organizational needs with other agencies, with community-based organizations, private providers, local municipalities, marketing, customer service, and outreach needs, technology, again, both on the rider side of how they're receiving information, using services, and on the back end. And then capital and funding needs. We're constrained in what we can do. How can we be going after ways to stabilize costs and get additional funding? What we heard from the outreach, so a lot of these are going to be on that customer-facing side of things. I won't read them in detail, but a lot of interest in additional services, increased frequency on weekends, evening services. But outreach down, it wasn't really something they directly asked for, but just hearing a lot of people not know about these, more so the smaller private services that they could access, getting the word out about those was a key outcome. Additional coordination, a lot of people talking about getting access to stops, missing sidewalks, or looking for that flexibility of services. We call it deviating fixed routes. Safer and more comfortable transit stops, especially when they're waiting for longer periods of time on the regional services. Support for enhancement of volunteer driver programs. Heard about a bundle of programs that used to be operating and are no longer, or existing ones where they're just really having trouble getting volunteers and therefore can't operate as much service. And then continued coordination between the different transit programs, including medical service vans. Okay. I have a shortened version of the priorities. These are longer descriptions within the plan, but how exactly do you pick and choose which of these needs you're addressing and strategies that you're using? So priority number 1 is to maintain and enhance existing services. Don't want to be taking service away from folks and want to be able to have that stability provided. Number 2, providing adequate capital replacements. Can't run the services without vehicles and keeping those running. 3 was providing or enhancing on-demand services, so more traditional dial-a-ride, but also looking into other door-to-door opportunities. Conducting active outreach, travel training, and marketing, again, really trying to get the word out about what's available. And enhancing safety and security, and I think that looks fairly similar to the priorities we just saw a few moments ago, really holding those values across decision-making. A few more in here: increasing reliability and on-time performance of those services, partnering with local jurisdictions to help enhance the accessibility of routes and stops, implementing electronic fare systems, potentially ones that could work across multiple jurisdictions and services. People need to get where they need to go. They don't mind who they're going through, but being able to have a fare system really eases some of those challenges. And maintaining affordability of services, especially for those dial-a-ride that are serving seniors and people with disabilities that can get where they need to go. Okay, there's a few tables in there of the different strategies. So again, these are just organized by that need area in there, and they're not prioritized. But what exactly do we mean when we say increase service hours and frequency? Well, first we need to sustain our current service levels, what we're looking to do. But as funding is coming in, we should be implementing that long-range transit plan that kind of set out the different priorities and improvements. So for each of those need areas, you'll see a long list of different types of things you can do. This plan is often referenced when you're going after state, federal funding, and you want whatever strategy you're looking after to be showing up in that list. All right, so next steps, we are seeking adoption of this document. What this will be doing over the next 4 or 5 years or so is providing a guide for implementing service improvements and meeting those needs we had identified. It's a regularly updated plan, so roughly in 2028 or 2029, come back in and do a similar process, get back out to the community and see what's changed in the coming years. I think with that, anything to add? Or questions and discussion?
No, we can go to questions and discussion on this piece.
Okay. Director Davidson?
Thank you, President Host Pressey. Thank you for preparing both the presentation and the document. I do have a question around I guess, many of the pieces here seem very similar to other documents that have been put together in recent years, including our needs assessment, our long-range transit plan. And I'm wondering, maybe this is directed to you, Manager French, how will you use this document in different ways than those existing documents that do a good job of communicating to different audiences that use and don't use our service?
So the coordinated plan and the project management plan, the 5310, really is based on those funding streams. So as those committees are looking, as projects are coming in or we're looking to fund projects, this governs how those funds are distributed or what those funds are eligible for. So the other documents that we have are not specifically related to those. For the 5310 funds that we get through the state and through the FTA, we're required to have these plans to make sure that we're addressing the needs of seniors and people with disabilities.
So you use the word governs. Does it govern or does it inform? Like, are our hands tied by this, or does it inform our decision making, I guess?
It's inform. It
Okay.
doesn't have you shall do X, Y, and Z. It's
I did
here's-
not read that in the report, so I just wanted to confirm that. Okay.
But I would add, especially like the 5310, when you do apply for projects, you got to kind of point to these plans.
Got it.
To say, this is why we're doing it. And as you had said earlier, these plans are have a lot of similarities. But this is just really focused on making sure we're paying attention to seniors and people with disabilities.
Okay. Were there any gaps at the end of this that you saw that either your intuition said, oh, maybe that was a gap here, or based on the other reports that you saw, it didn't bear out in the data this time, but we would have expected it in past.
I would say I didn't really see any surprises in the process. It's fairly consistent. I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking with the public or our customers and the community and our stakeholders that, in the community for all of our plans.
Mhm.
So we haven't seen a lot of change.
Okay, thank you.
Director Duncan?
I'd like to kind of just speak to that a little bit. I don't know if this is exactly a question, but I also found it to be a bit repetitive, and I think that's a good thing here because it means it's reflective of all the other studies and things that we've been working on, which we'd hope the document was. And I know this isn't a perfect, and I don't mean to toot our own horn because we're definitely not a perfect transit agency, but we have been scoring above other transit agencies when it comes to different categories, including like the service that we're providing. So there is a possibility that we're paying a bit more attention to some of the ADA needs on a regular level than maybe other transit agencies who would have to formulate a similar document would be. And I'm going to theorize that that could be it. And again, we're not perfect, and we definitely need to take special lens. Like, I'm also disabled, but I just want to highlight that because we have been told that from some of the other groups that have worked with us, and that might also lend to why this document is a bit more similar. And I guess I hope in the future it is similar because that means we're talking about it on a regular basis and not just when we have to talk about disabilities. So yeah, anyway, more of a comment, but thank you.
Director Carney?
Thank you, President Hinojosa-Pressey. So we have identified some similarities. I wanted to ask maybe a similar but different question, and that is, this is an updated document. If you had to kind of highlight for us any of the major differences from its predecessor, that could be useful.
Take a first pass at that. The funding mechanism that this plan was for, I wouldn't say changed substantially, but how the state's distributing that changed quite a bit. So that was one we knew going into it. The major areas within the needs and strategies that we really expanded, I think, were related to fleet issues, backlogs of getting new vehicles. That was not just Cherriots, but all of the providers. The volunteers seems to have dropped off pretty heavily. Technology, there's a lot more opportunities for it, even if it's only been a couple of years. So there was a few additions within that. And then a lot of the services changed, especially with Tillamook County's changes there. So just getting that up to date and having a place where you could reference what is actually here and going on, that was pretty substantial. I don't know if there was anything else you saw.
No, I think that covers.
Thank you. And then this is, I would be interested, with all of our guidance documents, and especially with some of the recommendations and strategies that are in here, I see solutions, but I don't see in some of the solutions things we can do in isolation as a transit district. And so I'm wondering how this plan or other similar plans, where is the relationship to a local transportation system plan or a county transportation system plan when we're talking about creating effective transportation solutions for these communities?
So I would say that as we're working with those groups, because we're part of the transportation system plans, we would provide these documents, and we would use these documents as our voice and to help influence those plans and processes, so that we have these documents in place. So our job is to use them to influence those plans to help address those issues.
Thank you. That is very helpful. And I just wanted to call everybody's attention to the customer or the feedback in the community outreach. What do you appreciate about Cherriots? I can't remember if it was, I think it was just an open-ended question, and they send our friendly drivers. So kudos to our operators who are out there making this a friendly service.
Any other questions? Yes, Director Morrow.
Thank you, President Hinojosa-Pressey. I just wanted to call out that I really appreciated the focus of the veteran service and more specifically the transportation system that's available connecting the Salem community-based outpatient clinic with the Portland VA. That's something that gets missed a lot. It is a volunteer-based system. It's not funded by the VA, even though it's parked on the VA lot. It does get overlooked a lot. So I really appreciated that it was highlighted in this report. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for that presentation. And that gets us on to the next part. Do I have a motion to adopt this document? Oh, wait.
You need to hear the PMP report.
Now I
Can you
need
do
to hear
them
the
combined?
PMP. My bad. I'm ready to get us going.
Yeah. There. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Slides will be coming up here momentarily for the 53. Tonight, we're also coming before you to approve the update to the 5310 Program Management Plan. A little bit of information that we'll cover, the document's purpose, the difference between the 5310 PMP and the coordinated plan, the outline of the 5310 PMP, the changes that were made to the project management plan, and the needs and strategies that were there, and then we'll take questions, and then we can move on to that last part.
And then we can do the thing that I was trying to push forward.
So the purpose of the 5310 plan is to administer the 5310 funds that the district receives directly from FTA. These funds can only be used within the urban growth boundary, and the 5310 funds that come from FTA, the state of Oregon also gets those funds which are passed through to us, and the coordinated plan covers those for Marion and Polk County, but we're required to have our own project management plan for the 5310 funds. So as I said, the 5310 funds for the PMP from FTA that come directly to Salem Kaiser or Salem Area Mass Transit District are for only within the urban growth boundary. They've historically been used for shop and ride, and we've had Garton get a van that was funded through the 5310 funds for moving clients around within the urban growth boundary. The coordinated plan covers all of Marion and Polk counties, but the PMP is specifically just to the urban growth boundary. So the 5310 PMP is broken down into different sections. Section 1 is the introduction and description of the program and eligible subrecipients. So that's with all of the 5310 funds and STIF funds that come through to fund services for seniors and people with disabilities. It's not just Cherriots that can apply for those funds. It's throughout Marion and Polk County. So making sure that we understand that. So Section 2 is the program's priorities. Section 3 is roles and responsibilities for us and the subrecipients. 4 is coordination, including public participation for the funds. Section 5 is the project selection criteria and method for distributing the funds. Section 6 is the annual program and project development and approval process. 7 is the administration, planning, and technical assistance of the grant funds for others. 8 is the transfer of funds. 9 is the private sector participation, how that works. 10 is the civil rights portion of the plan. 11 covers the reporting that is required for the 5310 funds. 12 is program management, and 13 is other, and that's federal requirements that are within the requirements for PMP, but are the federal guidelines specifically. So within this document, it really mirrors the coordinated plan, and they really are basically very similar. A major or a change that is in this is we've eliminated the technical advisory committee for the funding. Both the coordinated plan and the PMP, they weren't equal, so it wasn't required in our coordinated plan, but it was required in the PMP. And the group of people, it was all of the STIF advisory committee would sit on it, and we would have one or two community members. So the STIF advisory committee and one or two members would make a recommendation to the STIF advisory committee, and then they would go through the process again and then make the recommendation to the board. So for staff and for the committee, they're like, this is really redundant. The members from the community didn't feel that it was really a necessary step, so we've made the coordinated plan and the PMP match without having a technical advisory committee. It still goes through the process of evaluation with the advisory committee, but we're eliminating that. And then the last piece is we've updated the needs and strategies, and those are the needs and strategies from the coordinated plan work that we did. They're just more specifically targeted to the urban growth boundary. And with that, I can answer any questions, or actually, I'll say this first. The STIF Advisory Committee recommends that the board adopt the Coordinated Public Transit Human Services Transportation Plan and Marion and Polk County, for Marion and Polk counties, and the Section 5310 Program Management Plan as presented in attachment A and B, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have now.
Thank you. All right, any questions? No? Wow, okay. Seeing none, then I think we can move into that recommendation. Y'all already know how antsy I am to approve this, so somebody make a motion.
I move that the board adopt the Coordinated Public Transit Human Services Transportation Plan for Marion and Polk counties and the Section 5310 Program Management Plan updates as recommended by the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund Advisory Committee and presented in attachments A and B.
Thank you, Director Davidson.
I'll second.
Thank you, Director Duncan. We have a first and a second. Any discussion on the motion? No?
Right here.
All right, Director Davidson.
I just wanted to thank the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund Advisory Committee, and for these kinds of committees are often thankless efforts. So I just wanted to put on the record, thank you for participating and taking a long, hard look at this stuff.
And I think also on that note, not just the committee, but also to staff for, listening to the needs of the committee. Because I mean, wow, governmental agency being redundant, I've never heard of that before. So I appreciate all your work as well. Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that was unanimous, so motion passes. Thank you very much. Okay, now let me get back to the top of my agenda. I think that moves us into our informational reports.
Good, then I'll ask Chris French to please come forward and present the report.
I was just telling Chris, Manager French, at the beginning of this meeting that I just felt like I haven't seen them in so long, and now I get to have you all this time.
And with that, I will present to you the May 2024 service change briefing. This service change will take place on Sunday, May 5th, and will be in effect until September 1st, 2024. For local bus service, we are implementing the Route 22 finally. So the Route 22 will go into service on that Sunday, May 5th. With those changes, that service will be a 20-minute service during the peak periods with 40-minute service in the evenings, and Sunday will be 40-minute service. It's a little outside of our normal frequencies, or the reason for that is without a transit center and trying to coordinate driver reliefs and use of facilities in the area, the cycle time just wouldn't quite get us to the 15-minute service that is our goal. And as the transit center comes online, we'll move forward with making those adjustments to the service. With the changes to the Route 22, it required some changes to other routes. So the Route 6 has had some slight modifications to the routing to free up space for the Route 22 to use the long pull-out in front of Walmart along with the Route 21. And then the Route 21, we've added a time point at that section, or at Commercial and Battle Creek, Commercial and Baxter, sorry, in order to facilitate driver reliefs and coordinating of transfers between the 21 and the 22. So holiday service, Memorial Day, we'll offer Sunday service. Juneteenth, June 19th, we'll have Sunday level service, and Independence Day on July 4th, we'll have Sunday level service. Cherriots Lift will have holiday service that matches the span of service for the local fixed route service, and there's no other changes to the service for this service change. And with that, I can answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Director Carney?
Thank you, President Hinojosa Pressy. Can you remind us and all of our listeners how frequently we put service changes into place and how we let our riders know?
Yes, so service changes are done 3 times a year, in May, September, and January. And there is a extensive process that the communications team does for reaching out to the community with social media, announcements on the bus, collateral, to inform the public that the changes are coming.
Thank you. Any other questions, Director Duncan?
I just want to say how excited I am about this route change. This has been a gap for a while, and it's really exciting to see this come through. I know that I've been hounding you about South Salem for a long time, and it's just, you've been telling me this is coming for a while, so I'm excited to ride it and try it out and get feedback, but mostly I'm just very appreciative of the I know we've got a lot of big changes on the horizon, and these little changes in between make a big deal for people who maybe don't know about that or just, riding every single day. So anyway, I just really appreciate the work on this project. It will affect my district very heavily, so thank you.
Director Davidson?
Thank you. Also wanted to say how exciting this is. I know Director Bob Krebs, or former Director Bob Krebs, was a strong proponent of this and advocate for this. It is unfortunate that he is no longer on the board to be able to see this, but I know he's still an active member of the community, and so it's wonderful that he'll be able to see this happen and benefit our community. I do want to just maybe put in stark relief how big of an impact this is, because it's from South Salem to the Amazon Fulfillment Center. It's only 4.4 miles, 11 miles if you happen to drive in a single occupancy vehicle. But if you were taking it by transit, not with Route 22, it's 1 hour and 18 minutes. You're going to catch 21 to the downtown transit center where we are, catch the 4 or any other bus, and then catch the 11. And in fact, when I first joined the board, I believe it was the first piece of public comment we received during my tenure on the board was a gentleman who lived in South Salem and worked at the Amazon Fulfillment Center and said how desperately he wanted a bus. He just couldn't make it work. And so he went out and got a car. And so I'm thrilled that we're able to fill this gap. I am I am thrilled that we're able to fill this gap. I wish we could have filled it earlier, but I am thrilled that we're able to fill this, so that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see it, like, in a lot of people's faces are just so hyped about Route 22 transit routes. Any questions over here? No? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so on to the general manager's report.
All right, thank you. So you do have in front of you your monthly communications update, which I did want to highlight the first two blocks, which are informing you of new employees and promoted employees at Cherriots. We're happy to have 5 brand-new transit operators who are in training right now, getting ready to expand operator workforce for the Route 22, and several other people, and we were able to promote 3 people into new positions over the last month or so. So with our trip to Washington, D.C. at the Legislative Conference coming up next week, I did want to highlight some legislative piece of good news. So if you'll remember, back in December, I did travel to Washington, D.C., and one of the visits I made was to FEMA/TSA, specifically to recommend that Cherriots be considered to be an eligible applicant for their Transit Security Grant Program. And we heard word the end of last week that we are now an eligible member, and we can apply in the upcoming grant cycle for the Transit Security Grant Program. That really helps us because it's a new source of funding for security projects that we can then tap that revenue source as opposed to including it into our bus facility requests, which are significantly oversubscribed. So more to come on that as the process works its way through. And I do believe we may be visiting FEMA TSA on our visit. I'll let others talk about the Council of Governments annual meeting a few weeks ago, but I did want to highlight that we received recognition, the Regional Cooperative Partnership Award in partnership with the City of Salem, City of Kaiser, and Salem-Kaiser Public Schools for our Youth Pass program. And I bring it up because for those that weren't able to attend, the recognition plaque is over there on the desk. So please check it out as you go out. And I want to let you know this is the 3rd time Cherriots has been a recipient of this particular award. Our first time, our partner was the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde for our 2X service to the casino and to the tribal headquarters. Our second our partner was Marion County, and that was for the Courthouse Square Rehabilitation Project that redid this facility, and then this is our 3rd one. So great success in that particular category. Special Districts Association has announced some board leadership training coming up. There's both in-person and Zoom options, and we'll have Kira send you the information tomorrow. And if your schedule allows and you're interested, please let her know and we'll get you registered. Staff is diligently working through the fiscal year 25 proposed budgets, which you'll receive as part of the budget committee in a little over a month. So please be prepared for that. And I just wanted to highlight earlier this month, a couple weeks ago, we recognized and celebrated Transit Operator and Maintenance Employee Appreciation Day with a whole day's long worth of festivities. And so our hats off to our frontline workforce who makes Cherriots so great each and every day with our customers. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. All right, so that brings us to our board member committee report. And I'd like to start off with Director Laura Midkiff.
All right. I'm trying to remember what's happened the last month and what I have and haven't talked about in a public setting. I'll let Ian and Sarah talk about the COG dinner if they want for their comments. And I guess I'll briefly talk about the most recent West Salem Neighborhood Association meeting. It was the first that I've been able to attend in this capacity after some months of delay. And I guess I'll say that it was invigorating, I guess is the word that I would use. And I don't often hear other directors talking about their neighborhood associations. And I don't know if that's for not attending or whatever that may be, but I would recommend that you do if the time allows, because our city councilors do and other public officials do. And I'll leave it at that to say that there was definitely an appetite to talk about transportation at the association, and other voices were dominating that conversation. I was glad to have been there to add our perspective, and I would encourage my colleagues here to do the same. The only other thing maybe I'll mention in passing is that I think it was Sarah and I attended the State of the City address, and it was appreciably short address on the part of the, appreciably in the sense that it was measurable, not that I appreciated it. I actually think it was a mistake that it was so short, but that's neither here nor there. But I bring it up to say that our city is a valuable partner in the work that we do, not just for infrastructure, but for policy. And our city is, in many ways, struggling. And I would draw our attention to bolstering our relationship with the city. Sarah and I have talked about this in the past. Hope to talk about it again in the future, but for those who are listening and interested in transit, to also invest their time and attention in city politics as well, because that we are at a juncture for the city, and what the results of the next year matter a lot, especially with the conversations that we have here. So if you're interested in transit, pay attention to the city as well. Did I do okay?
Thank you.
Did I remember?
Thank you very much. Director Navarro?
Thank you, President Hinojosa Presi. So I got to sit on, I sit on the STIF Advisory Committee, and I would like to echo Director Davidson's comment about how awesome of a group that we have for the STIF Advisory Committee. I am there more to listen than anything, and I had one comment though that was about, it was a question that was about serving veterans and making sure that we're including, you know, that demographic into the surveys, and it was well received, and everybody was like really gung ho about it, and was excited about being more inclusive to the needs of that community. So I really appreciated that. Also this month, I got to meet our survey takers on the bus, and that was pretty cool. They made a comment that Route 19 was one of the friendliest routes that they rode on, so I appreciated that. That's my ride home. And I attribute 100% of that to our drivers. I think that if you get on the bus and you meet somebody that has a good, you know, that's the first person that you see that has a good attitude, then you carry that with you as you ride. I attended this month's Coffee with Kathy, in that she got to speak a little bit about the issues, you know, in the community. More specifically, she talked about we had talked about like infrastructure, and we heard a little bit about this tonight about how we're making improvements on Verta Road. Well, not that specifically, but how like water is a big piece of that infrastructure. And how making sure that we're funding the water infrastructure projects as we're repairing the roads and putting in sidewalks, because it's not just laying down a patch of concrete. So that was really awesome to hear that. And Betty Hart from the Kaiser Fire District got to share about the pancake breakfast being moved to May 19th. In the recent years, that's been held on Mother's Day, and mothers want their day back.
Gee.
Yeah. So no more pancake breakfasts for mom. I mean, you can, but you have to do that at home. Don't put it off on the Kaiser Fire District. So that was really awesome to hear that they are supporting that. And also the update was that phase 1 has begun at the improvements over at Kaiser Rapids. And so they did their groundbreaking event. They are installing some turf fields out there. And in phase 2, they're going to be looking at transportation. And so that's putting in parking lots, that's building a route that can receive one of our buses to be able to turn around out there. So they're really excited about connecting with the transit district on coordinating that. And lastly, not necessarily transit related, but tomorrow at 12 p.m., just down the street over here, there's going to be a groundbreaking for the Vietnam War Memorial, which is the last war memorial that hasn't been built on the state capitol grounds. So I was really excited to participate in that this last legislative session, and happy that we were able to bring it home and make it happen so soon. And with that, that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Director Carney?
Thank you, President Hinojosa-Pressey. Let's see. It was a busy month, so I'm going to kick the COG dinner down the sub-district list here. And let's see. So I attended the COG annual dinner, and then on the 18th was, I have these out of order in my notes, I apologize, was the regional scenario planning meeting. So scenario planning is regional transportation planning within our metro area. I don't think it quite includes the entire MPO, but it's the jurisdictions represented within our urban growth boundary to help us meet the greenhouse gas reduction targets set by the state. So the first meeting of the advisory committee was convened, and my understanding is that from the advisory committee meetings, the jurisdictions, which includes transit, and that's why I was there, then sort of take the show on the road. So there is not a lot of community input so far at these particular meetings. In fact, I'm not even sure they were publicized, or this particular meeting was publicized, but it was a really interesting conversation between the county, the city of Salem, transit, and Marion County about, you know, whether the statewide transportation strategy that has been prepared by ODOT, and, you know, would be a useful starting place for us in terms of meeting our greenhouse gas reductions targets. I'm feeling like the sentiment in the room was pretty divided on whether or not ODOT's STS would be suitable in providing solutions for us. And so the group now is sort of in view of trying to meet our greenhouse gas reduction targets, come up with different mechanisms that we could employ as a region. You know, is it land use planning? Let's just put everything really close together from now on so that people don't have to drive big distances. That'll take our greenhouse gases down. Or do we just say, forget cars, we're gonna have the best public transportation system in the world, and everybody's just gonna ride that instead? Or, right, so there's a lot of different mechanisms that we can use, and this is an opportunity for us to identify those that could work within this area. Some may work better for some implementers than others, but I'm really hopeful, based on the conversation, that we can have some collaborative solutions that really sort of illustrate the interdependence of the different groups in the room. You know, transit can only go so far. We can't go where there aren't sidewalks, right? Transit can offer a lot of service within our fixed service area, but if you build all of our high density housing on the urban fringe, it's going to be difficult to serve. So we need to kind of identify all of those issues and figure out ways that we can come together to meet these greenhouse gas reduction targets. And this is a requirement of the Salem-Keizer area as a result of the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities rules that passed in 2022. And so now we're implementing this, and I think I have a deadline somewhere on here that Yeah, we need to have this done by December 2024. So that's like in a few weeks.
Yep.
We do have the ability to request a change in that deadline. That deadline assumes that all of the partners at the table are going to look at ODOT's statewide transportation strategy and say, their ideas look good. And I think that we are going to end up with a more customized plan. And after that, I went to the SCATS Safety Action Committee. So the Salem-Keizer Area Transportation Study is pulling together, I think it's a Safety Action Plan Committee. This was our first meeting in months and months and months. There were staff members that got sick with COVID, and we just had delays and delays. So we are at a point where, not at this meeting, but the next meeting, we are going to review and select a goal statement. So this could be something like, we are okay reducing the number of serious injuries and fatalities on, in the MPO, or we want 0, or something more poetic. Often they are more poetic, like we place value on human life, and 1 injury is too many, and no deaths should occur on our watch. Some of the goal statements have timelines, like by 2035, we want to see 0 deaths. A lot of the goal statements have a lot of striving in them. So we're going to try to do less striving and more doing, more kind of action-oriented. So that was great. I got to see Counselor Stapleton there. She's on that. I believe Commissioner Cameron was invited but was unable to attend. It was pretty light attendance, but it was great conversation, and there is a really impactful, very educational, wish we could spend time on it, story map on the SCATS website, the review of the top 20 high injury corridors. And I can send you all the link after this meeting. It's really worth looking through, and you can parse it by what type of injury. Was it a pedestrian? Was it a bicyclist? Was it this? Was it that? Was it a serious injury? Was it a fatality? Where was it? What was it? So highly encourage folks to take a look at that. It really tells, I think, a story about our community, and one that I think, can help inform our regional scenario planning, really, more necessarily than the work I think we do. I think transit has a role to play, but pedestrian safety is often interactions between privately operated vehicles and individuals, and thankfully not our transit fleet and individuals. So went to that on the 20th. Fun meeting, good meeting. And then on the 26th, we had our policy committee meeting for the Salem-Keizer Area Transportation Study. And after months of deliberation and back and forth, we were actually able to come to a decision on how we can update our voting structure and make some other changes moving forward. And that was really big for the SCATS Policy Committee. We had kind of been at a place where there was more or less an impasse, and I have to say there was a lot of personal conversations and time invested outside the meeting by a lot of folks around that table in advance of that meeting, and I think there was a pretty significant shift towards compromise that helped us pass a motion that directs SCATS staff to prepare an amendment to the SCATS cooperative agreement to add the city of Almsville as a voting member, and to provide an additional voting seat to the city of Salem, and additionally for SCATS the SCAT staff to update the bylaws and cooperative agreement concurrently so that they are not in conflict with one another. And I think we'll see how that second piece kind of plays out in terms of how long it takes. Last time when SCATs added Turner to the cooperative agreement in 2003, it was 2003, Maria and I established that they probably didn't know how to use DocuSign at the time, but it took 11 months for them to just get the signatures on that page. So I'm hopeful that we will have more voices around the table sooner than 11 months, but we'll see how that timing works. And just big kudos to the chair of that committee, Kathy Clark, for leading that meeting. It was not an easy meeting. Our meetings recently haven't been all that easy, and I think she did really well in those circumstances. And that concludes my report. Now I'm here.
Thank you
I have
very
a
much.
question. Can I ask a question of Director Carney?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, just so I have this straight, last time we came together, you had asked us to endorse a facilitated process.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have, did I hear you right?
You did,
You
yeah.
have,
yeah.
we have it.
No, we don't.
We have an agreement. We have a,
We have an agreement.
Right.
So thank you for
so
bringing
that's
it up.
huge.
It is
Yeah.
huge, but it is taking place without a facilitated process. That was an agreement that I, as our transit district representative, felt that in order to move things in a positive direction or move them at all, we needed to soften our stance and choose a path that focused us on making movement in a positive direction versus sticking to that principle. I really think had I said no, a facilitated process is the way we're gonna go, I'm a no vote, because this doesn't meet my perfect standard for what progress should look like. This would not have been the outcome. We would have added Almsville, and that would have been the outcome. There would be no additional seat for Salem and no update to the cooperative agreement.
And to the extent that is true, I applaud you for this outcome.
Thank you so much. I applaud everyone there. It was a big day.
Thank you for that update. And we'll move on to Director Duncan.
Sure. Thank you very much. First of all, I wanted to say to Sadie, as you're deliberating all of these possibilities, my completely reasonable suggestion is monorail. Of course, it's the solution nobody's thought of. Can go right over the freeway. It's totally cost effective, maybe. And I just want to put it out there. So,
Yeah, thank you.
you're very welcome.
If we don't do it, Shelbyville will, so.
I'm a big fan of monorail. Anyway. MWAC did not meet this month, so I have no report there. But I do have an update from the DEI committee. We did meet on International Women's Day. It was lovely. President Hino's-Pressy and Laura Mitkiff were both there with me. It was great. We recognized our initiative entitled Connecting Cultures, Creating Community, and how important it is that we're continue to integrate the cultures from our community into the work that we do here, and specifically by reaching out to the community. And we talked a little bit about what we're going to do going forward. So we reviewed and discussed Immigrant Heritage Month, which is coming up in June. And we want to explore some internal talent as well as within the district as we can. And we're going to be launching an internal call for art. And we are going to explore the possibility of having an artist create a foundational piece of artwork with which to integrate the selected artwork by the district's internal artists. So basically the idea is to have people submit smaller pieces of artwork that can be compiled into a larger mosaic for one of our buses to represent Immigrant Heritage Month. It's a bit of a lift, and so this is a bit aspirational. We're all doing the groundwork as best we can to make sure this happens, but I'm really hopeful that this works out. It could be a really fun way to incorporate a bunch of different expressions, especially considering that we're trying to represent a very diverse group of people, and that's a bit challenging. So we're going to do what we can and trying to take that input directly from the community rather than coming up with something ourselves. Additionally, we recognize that World Beat usually takes place in June, and so we're hoping that Cherriots will be able to host a table during the festival and support World Beat, which is very much in line with Immigrant Heritage Month. We also talked about an open call for artists in the community for September's Hispanic Heritage bus wrap. Depending on how this goes, that might influence the process a bit. For FY25, we're going to release the Heritage Bus Wraps schedule to schools, and in doing so, conduct an open call for student art to further integrate Cherriots in the community it serves. So we're hoping that now that we've kind of done this pilot year, we'll be able to get together what we want to do next year ahead of time and release it to schools so we can have student participation artwork for the entirety of 2025. I really hope that that works. We've had a lot of conversations about how to make that work logistically. I love involving students in the work that we do, and I like especially this going alongside the Zero Pass program and having more students involved in transit already. I'm really hopeful that it goes well, and I'm excited to do that. And this is the thing I'm honestly the most excited about. So we deliberated the initiation of a community leader challenge in September to coincide with Tri-Transit Week. The initiative aims to offer leaders an opportunity to experience something new while also fostering empathy by immersing them in the daily experiences of individuals who heavily rely on public transportation. So that this kind of came to mind, Director Laura Midkiff and I were the ones that kind of were at an event together, and we were talking with counselors, and it was clear that there were just certain services they didn't know were offered, and I think it was Julie Hoy in particular who expressed interest in wanting to know more about those services, and we thought it would be wonderful to provide an opportunity and a little bit of positive peer pressure to our elected officials to get on transit and experience it themselves, whether that was just taking a ride, or I would like to encourage them to take a ride down here where we all meet, where people would need to come for public comment theoretically if they wanted to testify in person, or to their the nearest food pantry. We haven't really fleshed the whole thing out yet. It's just one of the newer things on the plate. I already have had some positive feedback around the concept from city councilors that are interested in participating, and I was very excited at the concept. I really want to see our elected officials physically put themselves in the shoes of our riders. And I'm really excited that the opportunity just kind of presented itself. So more to come on that, and I'm very, if you can't tell, I'm passionate about it, so I'm excited for that. We did attend the COG dinner. No one else has really talked on it, so I will. It was lovely. We had a performance from the Tribes, which was amazing, and I cried a little bit because I always do. And we were, I'll actually make this a bit of a personal note. We've had a really tense month, especially with SCATs. There's been a lot of personal meetings, a lot of conversations, and it really comes down to one of my personal sentiments with it. In this community, it's too small to burn bridges. No matter how much you disagree on policy or politics, at the end of the day, you have to be able to sit down and have dinner together and shake each other's hands and make it work anyway, because the community deserves that. Dinners like this give us the opportunity to kind of heal those wounds when we're all feeling a little stung from a difficult political conversation. And there was more than one opportunity that night where we were standing on stage with the exact same people that we were differing with and accepting awards together for the collaborative work that we'd done over the past year. And it was a wonderful reminder of how much stronger we are when we work together. And I think that was the most important part of the dinner for me, and I really feel like that came through when we actually got to the negotiating table later and were able to come to a compromise. It was not perfect, but it was progress, and I was really surprised at the thoughtfulness and also some of the people that came to a compromise with us. And so I just wanted to highlight, although these things seem like formalities, they are really important in allowing us to do the work that we do, and I really valued that night. I think that's everything. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that report, Director Duncan. Before we get to Director Davidson, I was wondering if I could ask how the internal art search within Cherriots might be looking like with
Do you have any updates?
for Immigrant Heritage Month.
Submissions are here. Submissions are due April 8th, and so we launched the call for at the most recent GM roundtable, and since then we've posted flyers and Otis slides, and there is a lot of buzz about it. So we are excited too to see what's coming, but I have a few people who have already told me that they are participating, and the coolest thing about that is they're participating with their kiddos, and so we're really pleased about that.
I love that. Thank you. Okay, Director Davidson.
Thank you. So earlier this month, I was able to participate in the Transit Operator and Maintenance Worker Appreciation Day. I joined some members of the executive leadership team at Del Webb early in the morning. And if ever there was an opportunity to reinforce my appreciation for transit operators and maintenance workers, it was at 5 in the morning. And just consummate professionals, both our transit operators and maintenance workers. I had a chance to talk with a maintenance worker about a project he was recently working on, and I'm not particularly mechanically inclined. Director Navarro, you probably could have held your own with this conversation. I could not. And again, just demonstrated the how lucky we are to have them work for this organization, to have them serve our community. And so I guess wanted to publicly recognize them for all the hard work that they do. I know it's wonderful that we have a day to recognize them, to pointedly recognize them, but I'm grateful every day for them. So I, along with a few of my colleagues here, was able to attend both the Salem State of the City as well as the Kaiser State of the City. And one theme that was common to both of them was the impact of measures 5 and 50 on funding of local governments. And so this is something that I've mentioned in past meetings. It is a identified regional priority at the Council of Governments, and it is the impacts of it are far-reaching. Decisions that were made when I was a child are now impacting the lives of my children, and will continue to impact the lives of my children if action is not taken. And speaking of the Council of Governments, we had a legislative committee meeting. Because it is an identified regional priority, we had the Yamhill County assessor come and speak to us about measures 5 and 50. He is one of the experts because that is his job. And very fascinating. I will see if I can't get the recording of that conversation for those of you that are interested. He also passed along a report, had a very important sounding title. Anyways, it's 160 plus pages detailing the ins and outs of measures 5 and 50. I've only just started reading it, but it is a very, very complicated issue, and it's a politically fraught issue. And the solutions will most likely represent something that Director Duncan has talked about progress, not perfect, but progress we need. And also at the State of the City for Kaiser, I was able to, along with General Manager Pollock, sit with representatives from Chemeketa Community College, and we were able to have just a brief but productive conversation about the future transit center located there at Chemeketa Community College, and very, very excited for that. And they are as well, which is wonderful to hear. I also was, I guess, going to the COG annual dinner. I also wanted to recognize, in addition to the award that we received, there was a second award given to the Monmouth Independence Trolley. And so the award committee ultimately decided to choose an urban project and a rural project. We were the urban recipient, and the Monmouth Independence, or the My Trolley, was the rural recipient. And as I think about that project, I keep on thinking about how current state funding is not adequate to meet the needs of rural communities in transit. Former Representative Peter DeFazio described transit as the lifeblood of our cities and our lifelines of our rural communities. And I don't know if we're yet to the lifeline status in much of Oregon. And our rural communities deserve significantly better. And so I'm interested to see where the conversations go at the state legislature as they think about what this next transportation package looks like and how rural communities will be better served through transit dollars. At the COG annual dinner, I became chair of the Council of Governments, and one of the, as our advocates mentioned, one of our regional priorities was supporting the passage of Senate Bill 1572, which would have studied the extension of a passenger rail line from Beaverton on down to Salem, and it did unfortunately die. There were two pieces to that. One would have been a study that would have been conducted by the Oregon Department of Transportation, and then the other would have been a convening of a advisory group that would have looked at issues like governance, ownership, operations, funding, those kinds of non-technical matters. And so while the bill did die, in my role as chair, I will be convening a advisory body to look at those issues that would have been looked at if that bill would have passed. We will not have the same financial resources as what might have been, but it is a regional priority of ours. It was bipartisan, bicameral support, and the support up and down the rail line, I think, demonstrated that there is a desire for this, and the Council of Governments has a role as a convener to help foster collaboration. And so Cherriots will, of course, have a seat at that table. I'm excited to continue that conversation there, and there may be some additional conversations happening there. So, and that really sums up my report for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Davidson. I wanted to bring up an issue that I think we've all kind of touched on a little bit, and just talk about what we're facing as a community, and what Director Duncan said about needing to work collaboratively even in times of tension, and also what Director Laura Midkiff brought up about making sure that we're participating in our neighborhood associations really spoke to me, because we know that there's serious issues affecting our community. We've seen it. We've especially seen it over the past year. We've had operators come to us and talk to us about the violence that they're seeing, that they're facing. We saw this last month with our own children being impacted by this. And it's really just made me reflect on that quote about how everybody wants to save the world, but nobody wants to do the dishes. This is a community issue, and it's not going to be solved by othering others. It's not going to be solved by expecting someone else to take up the mantle. It's going to be solved by us coming together, maybe literally knocking on our neighbor's door and having a conversation. And we don't need to be agreeing on every single thing, but we do all agree on this thing, that we all care about our community, that we see our children being impacted, our families, our siblings, aunts, uncles, fathers, mothers, and we need to realize that is impacting us together, collectively, and come together. So yes, do please participate in your neighborhood association meetings and work together to help our community out. So thank you. And with that, it is now 7:23, and we are adjourned.